Hello, Fire Fam. Welcome back. This week I was deep in my meditation. I've really gotten back into the practice of meditating daily. I realize how powerful it actually is, and it ties so beautifully with today's topic about connecting to your intuition. This is something that is really important to your health that we have ignored, I would say, for many years in Western practice. It's so often that we don't even ask the questions that impact our life when it comes to our health. When we get sick, the first thing we tend to think about are maybe the obvious things in Western culture, where we're more like, okay, I have this illness. Did I get it from somewhere? Did I get it from someone? Is it something that is genetic? We think of the causes as often things that are external, outside of us, rather than taking a moment to visit what's going on in our internal worlds that could have contributed to how we're feeling. With this, for me at least, I've always been a spiritual person, and I don't know if there's really spaces to fully develop it in the way that I wanted to. So it became something that I searched on the internet to learn more about at a time, and I sought out people to support me with this journey because I really wanted to understand who I was and how my spiritual communication worked. There were definitely moments, and I very much know that there's evidence that really showed me that God is real, that I'm experiencing something beyond myself that is greater than just myself, but I didn't always know how to tap into that energy, that information, and to know what that actually sounded like. When I was younger, like let's say 10 years ago, when I was in my 20s, I struggled with anxiety. I was always anxious, but most people would have said, like, I'm really calm and positive. But internally, I felt a lot of anxiety if I wasn't doing things I thought I was supposed to be doing. And even when I was doing as much as I possibly could, there was always this nagging feeling that I needed to be doing more. The anxiety, even though I became more successful and started doing more things, it almost got louder. And so that's really when I started to question myself and why this was happening. Why is my anxiety increasing if I'm actually doing the things that logically I thought I was supposed to be doing? Obviously, something had to be off. If my body is giving me signals of one thing and my brain is on another page, there's a disconnect happening there. And there's ways that our body tries to communicate that disconnect to us. So that starts to look like things such as digestive issues, anxiety, depression, trouble sleeping, indecisiveness, doubting yourself about decisions when you finally make one, frequent headaches, inflammation, pain in the joints, being more susceptible to injuries at the gym, or just randomly feeling pains in your body, not feeling good in your body, chronic pains that you just can't seem to make sense of, leaning into vices like overeating, drinking, doom scrolling, binge watching shows, drinking excessive number of cups of coffee, constantly checking your phone. These are things that we normalize so often or write off and don't explore the internal experience of what's happening in our body and what that could actually mean about the way we're living or supposed to be living. There tends to be this theory. I don't even know if theory is the right word. It's more about we all think there's this general right way to live so often. And being someone that grew up in an immigrant family, there was a very clear path that my family wanted for me. They wanted me to be the good girl and follow the right path and, not smoke, not do drugs, don't drink. You should focus on school. Sports were kind of like optional, but, make sure that you're on top of your health, eating the most nutritious food, cooking lots of fresh meals. And while many of these things are really great and I do love and live by many of these things often, from a career standpoint, it felt like I had one path, right? It was, I was really certain that I was going to be a doctor. And I obviously very much love health. I just realized that I was more passionate about the preventative end and this deeper stuff that you're here listening to this podcast on. I was never meant to follow a very traditional path, But I tried my best and did everything that I could to do that because I was conditioned to do exactly that, right? It was a pressure, an internal pressure that I felt. And I wanted to do it because I wanted approval. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted and respected by my family. And it's not throwing any shade at them because they were doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing, raising me in a way that was going to lead to what they perceived as success. And I think that's very, very beautiful. Every generation will continue to do that. The thing about that can sometimes happen is we get disconnected from what we are actually meant to be doing because it doesn't always follow the exact path that our parents sometimes had hoped we would follow. It's not always a traditional, organizational, structural, smooth flowing thing that occurs. So when we start to notice some of the things that I mentioned, which I wrote this list right before I hopped on, and just so you guys know, I have not been using AI to create the structure for these. It's like low-key something I'm a little proud of because I want to tap into my intuition. I feel like, again, going back to the topic of this podcast, I want to be in direct alignment with my intuition. Personally, I've been noticing some of these things resurface. While they were really loud in my 20s, they're coming back. I'm noticing some of these things showing up, and I know that because I've been leaning into some of these distractions, especially for me lately, I've been on my phone a lot. I've been having a tough time, I would say, like in this past month, I've really reeled it in. But yeah, with just staying on top of my health and the practices that I know that are really good for me, I've been feeling really disconnected from my power. I also gave myself a reading last night using some of the oracle cards that I have to help me kind of figure out what it is that I'm not paying attention to. There's some kind of disconnect, and I haven't been giving myself that space of stillness or quietness to really connect to my intuition. And I want to get more into that. So more of my notes I have about messages from your intuition and how they come through, and the actual practices that you can start doing so that you can connect to your intuition, because I feel that's really important. No matter who you are, you have to be connected to your inner voice. If we get lost in the rat race of life and we're just doing, going, filling up our days, being so busy that we don't have time to think or assess how we're actually feeling about the experiences that we're having, we can easily just never really stop and go so far in a direction that we are not aligned with. Even though it feels good and you can sometimes receive affirmation from people around you or acclamations and people saying you're doing a great job, what the work that you're doing is amazing, that's all well and good. But if it's not in alignment with your soul's purpose and what you're supposed to be doing, then you're going to feel that disconnect, and it's not going to actually feel as fulfilling internally as you thought logically that it would, which is very much what happened to me. I was doing all the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing, but internally I still felt this lack of fulfillment. I felt that there was a depth to my life that I was missing, that I craved so badly. I really wanted to experience it because, in my perspective, life is about experiencing the full spectrum of emotions, regardless if whether we perceive them as a good emotion or a bad emotion. I think that we get to have them all, right? And sometimes that creates fear in people. There are so many emotions that we seek to avoid, and it's easy to do so when so many things are right at our fingertips. So checking our phones all the time, food that is highly palatable and easy to eat, going out to eat and like overfilling ourselves to create this like physical sensation that actually distracts us from what's really going on internally. Those were patterns that showed up for me. I've shared this before, but there was a period of time where I was really struggling with binge eating, and I was so ashamed of it because, number one, I'm a dietitian. Number two, I was like that fitness chick and I loved that identity, and my body started to change. So I started questioning myself and everything that I wrapped my identity into. And it's like, I should know these things. I'm a health professional. I support people with this. Why am I feeling so out of control and unable to fight that urge? I would show up at the closet and I'd be like, try this snack and it doesn't make me feel good. Try another snack and it doesn't make me feel good. Then I did something salty. Then I'd have to go back to something sweet, and then back to something salty and back to something sweet. This was a pattern that was distracting me from what was really going on internally. I was never really taught how to process my emotions or how to understand and trust my intuition. The women in my family are actually extremely intuitive. But what I've noticed, especially with being a first generation American, it was almost like, my mom really almost drove to really see like logic as the main priority because she wanted to be successful in this country. She came here without her family, which is so, so brave. Coming alone. She married my dad and they moved to America together without really having any kind of strong foundation. They had to completely do everything on their own. And they wanted to do it on their own. They wanted to feel competent and autonomous and know that they had the ability to make their dreams come true, which is so, so inspiring for me. And also the other side of that is we tend to disconnect from things that were traditional cultural practices, even around intuition, even with how we perceive things. Because coming to America, for them, it was almost like, okay, I have to embrace the way life is lived here. And so in Syria, certain practices or certain things that we believe around health, we also kind of disconnected from. There are still little things that my mom will do and things that I remember from my childhood that we leaned into and that I'm bringing back. Things that aren't really rooted, that I'm not actually sure if there's real science supporting it, but I know that they feel good when I do them, that I'm experiencing something. Maybe it is psychosomatic just because I'm doing it and I'm told that it's something, or I had been told that it's something that makes me feel good. I lean into it. But nonetheless, I think a lot of those practices are beautiful. So reopening the door on those intuitive messages, trusting them, knowing that these are things that are safe to lean into. They can feel very scary. I've seen a lot of people refer to it as like a witch wound online. When you're someone that leans into their intuition or your spiritual gifts, or even our psychic gifts, which everyone is to some degree psychic, whether that fully resonates or not, just know that that is true, right? We all have a sense of intuition. That's kind of like what I would consider your psychic ability, right? That's your internal knowing. This is your guidance. This is your internal compass that God gave you, regardless of what your specific spiritual beliefs are as a Christian or something else, Buddhism, whatever you choose to practice. This common theme of intuition and spiritual guidance, it all ties together. And your psychic ability, and a lot of people fear that word psychic. A lot of people say stay away from that energy, especially when they're very deep into the Christian practice. I actually don't believe that that is true, that it's something that we should fear, because we all have it. There's just different ways to talk about it, but so many religions and cultural practices center around the same beliefs. They just have different names for them. It's nothing that we should fear, because regardless of where you are, your personal exploration of your faith and your connection to God is unique to you. It is an internal experience, whether you dip your toes in one thing or another. There's no wrong answer. There's only redirection. If it feels good, you follow that path. If it doesn't feel good, you redirect, right? Again, this is your navigation system. So if you're starting to get curious on how your messages actually come and how your intuition speaks to you, I'm going to share the 4 ways that this happens. The first one, it's called clairsentience. So all of these start with clair, right? The 4 clairs is what people will call them. So the first is about a physical experience that you have sending you the message. Okay, so start to pay attention to this. I think we experience all four of these, and sometimes we experience them in different moments. So you're going to also notice that there is one way that you lean into more than another, and that's totally normal. You might even have two ways. Very often we'll strongly develop one, which I think is a great way to start, is to really lean into one of the ways that you interpret and receive messages from God, from source, from the universe, from your intuition, right? When it comes to physical sensations, this can show up in many different ways. It can be a gut feeling that you get. It could be, sometimes when I know that I'm saying the right things, I get a tingle in the top of my head. It could be waves that you feel in the body. This is one thing that I always say, this can sometimes get confused with anxiety or emotions. Your intuition is a calm, grounded experience versus a trauma response would start to tie in emotions. That is your human mind starting to make meaning about the answers that arise or the fears around the potential answers or truth. So starting to notice and assessing what is really coming up for you is an important piece of this. If there are big emotional responses, that isn't necessarily your intuition. Your intuition is underneath all of that emotion. It's just a calm, grounded experience. That's the best way I could describe it. Versus an emotional response, you do feel physically in your body, but that's, again, your brain is making meaning about what's coming through. And our brain will do that even if our guidance, even if our intuition is knowing that this is the response. For example, if you were married and you get these intuitive hits, these experiences, a physical sensation around that person that feels like, suddenly I'm feeling really disconnected from this person, suddenly you get a bad taste in your mouth, like literally getting a bad taste, or their smell is off-putting to you suddenly. These can be the physical sensations that I'm talking about. Or, like your body feels like jolts if you're around them. These can be little signs that this isn't the right relationship for you. And when you think about it and you get that note that it's like, I need to walk away from this person, we get an emotional response. Of course, because that's not easy to do. I've never been through a divorce, but I'm just imagining and also just knowing from other people's experiences, it's not an easy path. You don't just wake up and do it and like skip along your way and everything's fine and dandy. No, we have a big emotional response to these changes. Even though your intuition is saying it, your physical body can layer in those emotional responses, but those emotional responses aren't telling you not to do it. It's just the fears that are coming up, right? So I wanted to make that distinction because that is really important, especially if you are practicing your clairsentience or you are someone that naturally receives messages in that way. Just know that there's going to be a difference between your physical emotional response and your physical intuitive response. The second of four is claircognizance, which is your inner knowing. This is sometimes like it feels less tangible to explain because with this, it's just like you can kind of feel it in your gut in a way, but it's just a simple message that comes to you. But it's a little bit different because there's also, I'm going to bring up the other three because this is where sometimes they get mixed up, right? So we already talked about the physical sensations, which is the clairsentience, your inner knowing, which is claircognizance, inner hearing, which is clairaudience, which is just an internal, like a literal audible message that you hear inside of your head, and then also clairvoyance, which are images that you see. that guide you. Okay, the inner knowing element is almost just like, if you've ever heard anyone from the spiritual community talk, it's just kind of like a download, is what a lot of people will call it. It's something that just drops in and feels very true to you. It's just like, I don't know how I know this, but I just know it. And it's not logical, it's just a truth. You didn't like actually hear a voice, and you didn't tangibly see anything, which is different from like the mental images and the inner hearing, clairaudience, clairvoyance. But it's a very sure knowing that you experience. With the clairaudience, again, that one's just like an internal message that you hear. I know in some ways, like especially if this is brand new to you, that might sound a little crazy, like you hearing voices or sounds. It's not crazy, it's a form of intuition. And interestingly enough, of course, a side note I'll share with you, I was listening to a video posted by this girl who worked with many people who experience psychosis on different levels or schizophrenia. And she kind of talked about there being themes across that population, which I find to be really interesting because, one thing about schizophrenia is they're hearing voices. And part of me is convinced that the voices that they hear are almost like a frequency that not all of us are finally attuned to. Because when they study this group of individuals and they have no connection to each other, they often see patterns of what they say and what they talk about, which I find to be really interesting. So it just kind of makes you wonder, like, are they tapped into something like almost like a frequency, an energetic frequency? If we're like little radios and there's different radio channels that God sends messages on, are they tapped into the same or similar frequencies or channels and are hearing these messages? So I don't know, just some food for thought. I thought that was quite interesting, and it does align with what I believe to be true in many ways. I think we do have different frequencies, different dimensions that we can experience, but we can't always make sense of. When it comes to some of these intuitive messages, especially like clairvoyance with the mental images, these images are open to interpretation and they don't always fit our logical brain. I think these can sometimes also be symbols to look out for. For example, once I did almost like a healing session, I guess you could call it, with a coach. And what I did was I closed my eyes and I really tried to tap into my clairvoyance, picturing mental images of my experience and what my intuition, and like teasing out the messages from my intuition. So what this actually looked like is when I was thinking about it, I was breathing deeply, I had my eyes closed, and I was doing my best to visualize and put an image or creation to what I was experiencing. And part of this is you don't have to always do things. Sometimes you just have to sit with the experience. So when I was sitting with that, I was breathing deeply, and I saw, as I was breathing into the pain of my body, I felt it in my upper back. And actually, this is what I was meditating and sitting with this morning too. I felt like a grayness, or I saw a gray cloud of smoke around my back, and I saw a small, scared bird. And it was quite interesting when you kind of think about it, and I really wondered like what that represented to me. But it felt really clear after I felt into that and sat with that message for a little bit longer. Birds are, I love birds, and I often almost request confirmation, I would say, from God, or signs, right? Like, I'm someone that does believe in signs from the universe, signs from God. If you pray for a sign, I do believe God always delivers. And the more concrete and specific you can be about these signs, the easier they are for you to interpret. So when I see a cardinal, for example, that is something to me that symbolizes something very deeply. When I was going through these channels of really feeling confused when I was trying to make that big shift in my career and I didn't know what was going on and everything felt really messy in my life, that big transition, I kept saying, like, I would have different symbols for different things. I was like, God, if you want me to go this way, please show me this symbol. If you want me to go this way, show me this symbol. And so when I saw cardinals, it was, to me, the affirmation that I chose every time I saw this to remind me of my power and that I was moving in the direction I always saw for myself. I really want to be a public speaker. That's something that I've always wanted to step into. And now I'm trying to give myself permission to come into those platforms, to be in the space, to be seen, to become the version of myself that gets to hold that and have that, to show up as that version of me every day. So whenever I was seeing those symbols, it was reassurance that I'm on the right path, that all of the things that I shook up and changed and went through a lot of painful emotions and lots of layers of shedding, it was all for something. And these mental images, that's such a beautiful way to do it, whether it's symbolic, but when I talk about it from your intuition, they're visualizations that you experience in your mind. When you close your eyes and you create that stillness, which is the number one key of how to connect to your intuition. I have 8 beautiful points for you on that. But just building off of these, these 4 clair experiences that you have, clairsentience, claircognizance, clairaudience, clairvoyance, these are the ways that your intuition communicates. This is how God can communicate with you. In order to be able to hear our intuition, we have to quiet the noise around us. So I'm going to get into these 8 ways. One of the ways that you can tap into your intuition is through stillness. For me personally, this is one of my favorite ways. Life is so busy and full and constantly moving. We could get caught up in just doing, and creating stillness, not trying to force yourself to think about anything, not trying to change your thoughts, just being in quiet allows the messages to come through. When you're always stimulated, you're not going to be able to hear your intuition. Like, for example, if you're always on your phone or you're doing work and the next thing you know, you're on to the next activity, doing something with someone, watching a show, and working at the same time. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with doing these things in isolation, but if there's no break from this constant stimulation, you're never going to be able to hear your intuition. There's no space for it to come through. You have to give yourself the opportunity, almost create that emptiness for some energy, some messages to come in. Okay, so whether that is meditation or, it doesn't mean you have to literally be still, but like going on a walk in nature without taking your phone, without listening to music, just being completely present in the very moment that you are in. It could be doing a mundane activity like cleaning the dishes or knitting something or working on a puzzle. These are moments of stillness that you can create that allow for the space for messages to come in. The next one is minimalism. So something that I often do, I'll just get the compulsion to get rid of a bunch of things. And I know we all feel this. And I do think that it is a way, when we have so much clutter, it's almost like, wow, things are so messy. Like literally in my house, they're so messy that I have to clean up the space. And I think I've heard even quotes from the Bible around this about like God in a cleanly house or something. I'm going to botch it. So if you're familiar with this quote, I actually think there's more to it than just like being clean, right? Or a way that maybe our parents got us to clean our homes. Minimalism, just having less to stimulate you, less to distract you, less to take your attention. When you're not around a lot of things, or you're around things that are very grounding and relaxing, this can also create space. The third one is imagination. So again, giving yourself space to be in your imaginative brain, to tap into your creativity. This can be a really beautiful way of connecting and expressing, especially if you're doing some kind of art while you do it and you're just moving with the energy that's coming through you, or tapping into whatever you're experiencing internally and making it something that shows up outside of you. These can be messages. The next one is journaling, and I'm gonna have this be a distinction because I have some other ones that are similar, but like journaling about how you're feeling. Like if you're waking up and you're feeling blah and you just don't even know what it is, just journal. And people will say like, I don't even know what to write about, but you will, right? You don't know because it's not about you forecasting the future. It's about starting to write, starting to put words to what you're feeling. So journal through that right away and let out what you're feeling. The next one, gathering past proof. So start to look back at ways that you have received affirmation about your intuitive nudges. There are 1,000 million % moments that hopefully are already coming to your mind where you're like, I had a feeling about this and it happened. There's a difference because we can also sometimes cause things to happen because of our beliefs. But again, it's coming back to that distinction I mentioned earlier around knowing whether it's an emotional experience that we're manifesting into truth versus a deep inner knowing. Okay, your intuition doesn't come along with emotions. It is separate, it is neutral, it is grounded. Okay, so finding ways that you've noticed that you've experienced truth revealing itself in the past. This is often how you are receiving, ways that you can tell that things are happening. So as you build that and gather that past proof, you'll start to see more ways in which that is showing up. When it shows up, you're going to identify it quickly. The next one, keeping records on your life. So if you're finding it to be really difficult to connect to past moments or connect to your intuition because you might be someone that leans more on the logic side, start writing down what happens in your day-to-day. You can look at it from this way. Even by documenting what's occurring and you look at it scientifically, you'll pick up patterns. So even if you're not fully tapped into emotions or experiences or your intuition, finding the patterns from concrete occurrences, you'll be able to deduce more, especially as time goes on. You can reference back. You're going to see reoccurring themes. You're going to see reoccurring patterns. When I do these activities, it leads to this response. When I'm doing this activities, I'm noticing I feel this in my body. Start making those connections. Next, number 7, affirmations. So this is about making statements and feeling into one of the 4 clairs of how you feel about it, right? So for example, if I say I'm going to be a millionaire and I feel some type of excitement, not excitement, that's not the right word, right? Because that's an emotion, but if I feel that tingle in my head, for me, physical sensations, I lean more into that. That is the way I experience my intuition very often. And so that to me, it's like, okay, cool. That means something. That's a truth. That feels alive for me. Or, I might say like, I'll try to think of another one. You can even ask yourself questions about, like yes/no questions, I would say work really well with this. What does it feel like? Does it feel like a yes? Does it feel like a no? Do you see the words yes light up in your head? Do you see the words no come up? Do you hear yes in your head? Do you hear no in your head? Do you envision something that feels like a yes in your life? Do you envision something that feels like a no in your life? Is there a mental image being created? So starting to make statements and seeing how they land in your body, whether it is through a knowing, a hearing, an image, or a sensation. Okay, again, these are clues. So just by saying it, and practice it with saying things that are very true and see how that lands. And then when you tap into questions that you're not certain in the moment about what is the yes, what is the no, which way to go, which way to not go, you can then use what you felt about things that you knew were a yes, that were absolute truths, and then say some no things so that you know what that false feels like, right? So again, you're building evidence around it. You're figuring out yourself. You're studying yourself and seeing how your body is communicating with you. Okay. And then number 8, change in perspective. So this could be literally traveling. This could be going somewhere that you haven't been, a coffee shop you've never experienced, a store you've never shopped in, looking at things from a different angle, experiencing reframes. Allowing yourself to shift the way you look at something is going to allow you to connect to your intuition. Sometimes it's a literal physical change of where you are located that can help with this. Or it can be through talking to someone else that can shed a perspective. Or it can be you journaling on it and flipping the narrative of the story that's happening. This simple change in how you look at things allows messages to come through that you may have not been able to hear when you were stuck in like a one-way tunnel on something. Okay. So with all of this being said, oftentimes these are topics that I get into with some of my clients around following your intuition, because when people come to me, even as a dietitian, when people are struggling with binge eating or drinking too much coffee or pain in their stomach, digestive issues, inflammation, frequent injuries, these are messages that are encouraging us to lean into our intuition. And if we don't have the skills to do that, we're never going to have the right remedy to fix whatever we're experiencing. In my program, Body and Soul Freedom, we get into this, which is why I feel like this program is so unique. I'm combining the logic, the science with the intuitive internal body experiencing. You are getting that body freedom that you are seeking, and you're getting that soul liberation, because you cannot have one without the other. They go hand in hand. You have to look at yourself as a whole person to heal, to make positive changes, to become your best version of yourself. I highly encourage you to check it out. If you're curious to learn more about the experience, which again, I've been wanting to really shift it into a group setting because I find it to be so powerful. So if you're hearing this right now, it is June of 2026. So you can either work with me one-on-one or in a group setting where you can explore this further. So I'm offering free consultations. Just shoot me a message. I'm also going to leave a link in the show notes to schedule a free consultation with me. If this has resonated, this is your opportunity to do so. I'm not sure if I'll always have free consultations on offer, but for right now, I do, because I want to connect with more people. I want to allow more people to experience body and soul freedom in a way that you're not going to be able to find everywhere else, especially if you're in a lot more traditional or Western paths. This is an opportunity. So I hope you see that, and I hope you step into it. All right, fam. Well, it's been a great episode, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. Love you guys.